My name is Cyril Verley. I'm the founder of CDV Systems and the COO of CodeBook Solutions. This is a presentation describing CodeBook and how it turbocharges your BIM and CAD data outside of BIM and CAD. The big idea of CodeBook from the designers, engineers, and contractors' point of view is that it is a database that sits completely outside a building project. And the database represents all the information within a building: room data, equipment requirements, door information. And that database, whether it's Access or SQL, that's what CodeBook is based on, can then be linked to a variety of BIM or CAD platforms that you see listed here. And once the linkage happens, you can then pass all kinds of information back and forth between those two BIM or CAD platforms and the CodeBook project. Downstream from the owner's perspective, we can then take that data from a CodeBook project and link it to other products such as Maximo or ArcGIS or COBie or commissioning. A little bit later in the presentation, you're going to see how CodeBook Mobile allows the database in CodeBook and all the assets in the model and the room data to be edited from a handheld device. And of course, the data can be pushed to Access or Excel files or Word documents. So this gives you a broad picture of what CodeBook is providing for the industry today. We're going to take a closer look now at three big ideas of CodeBook. The first is interoperability and collaboration. CodeBook is a Rosetta Stone. So in terms of interoperability, it provides a complete solution for taking a variety of BIM or CAD platforms and linking those into a singular CodeBook database. So if your project is using a Revit architectural model, and perhaps it's using AutoCAD that represents the electrical drawings and MicroStation for the mechanical drawings, those different disparate BIM and CAD platforms can be linked into one CodeBook project, and then the data can pass back and forth. To further describe the CodeBook in terms of the library, if you have within the CodeBook library, we call it the kit of parts, if you have a piece of equipment, let's say a VAV box, that has all kinds of data information in that VAV box, you then can link it to a Revit model and have that particular Revit family as a VAV box tracked inside of CodeBook. Likewise, in the same project, there could be a DWG block represented that VAV box, or a MicroStation cell component, or a MicroGDS component, or an ArchiCAD component. Within the same library, that VAV box can recognize these various components in those various BIM and CAD platforms. So it's a dramatic way of managing a huge amount of data in a very concentrated format. Next is the ability or the power of the kit of parts to manage the data across a campus. Here's a campus, for example. This is a campus of an institution. It's got a variety of building models in the project. And here's that same campus as a diagram. You've got campus site plan, and then each of these rectangles here represents a unique building. Here's the admin building, the chem lab building, the research safety building, or the north lab building. And within each of the buildings, there are different BIM or CAD models that exist that represent the overall data of that project. The CodeBook kit of parts sits outside all of these different buildings. So within that kit of parts, you have things like individual assets, VAV boxes, or you have O&M data attached to those assets, or perhaps you have room types that define all the requirements for a typical room in a project. Let's say you're doing a hospital. You've got a single bed patient room. All the requirements for that single bed patient room can be defined in the CodeBook kit of parts completely outside the BIM or CAD projects. Then each building has its own CodeBook project. So imagine you're doing a project in Revit and you've got to apply a URL link to that particular family. You're required in Revit to have to load that family into every Revit model across the entire campus in order to read the data and update the data. Here, you make the change once at the kit of parts level, and that automatically updates across all the projects instantly. There's no need to do any kind of update. It's an automatic update across all the CodeBook projects across the facility. Likewise, if you're doing a large hospital project and you've got the requirements for a room type that might be used across multiple buildings across a campus, you can make a change at the room type level and have it automatically change across the entire campus. I can't do that in BIM or CAD that quickly and that automatically. Again, this turbocharges BIM or CAD. If I look more closely at a unique building, so now this is the admin building. That admin building may have multiple Revit models linked to it. It may have an architectural model, mechanical models, electrical models, plumbing models, fire protection models. that same building might have AutoCAD files, or MicroStation files, or Excel files that represent the overall data of that particular project. Again, the CodeBook Kit of Parts sits completely outside that project, and this building has its own CodeBook project database, where CodeBook allows you to link in multiple BIM or CAD platforms into the same CodeBook project. And again, data can pass back and forth, and of course, you've got this CodeBook database is linked to the Kit of Parts. So if a change happens in the Kit of Parts, it's automatically changed in the CodeBook project. And because we can map parameter information back and forth, we can then take the parameter changes that have occurred at the Kit of Parts, and if we want, we can link it to the Revit models and pass that data back and forth into the models or into the AutoCAD files or into the MicroStation files. We're now going to look at how CodeBook manages data from the validation perspective. So management, comparison, and validation of room data. Here's an Excel file. You're starting a brand new project, you receive an Excel file from the client, and that Excel file lists all the equipment that's required for a particular project. The Excel file might have hundreds of columns of data where it defines all the required parameters within those pieces of equipment. Or perhaps these are columns of data that define all the additional required room data for a particular project, or door information. For you to take this and have to populate this into a Revit model could take a huge amount of effort, quite a bit of time. In this workflow, rather than populating any of this in Revit, instead you can establish within the CodeBook database all the required parameters for room data. In fact, what you're looking at here are the parameters that define the requirements for the VA and the DoD. They have a very specific list of parameters that define room data, and likewise the parameters that define equipment parameters that are required. So you create the parameters that are required both for room data, for equipment, and for doors, and then from the Excel file you can batch load that data into a project. So before you've drawn anything in Revit or AutoCAD, you've already established the entire room list, all the requirements for those rooms. You've established the library of all the equipment, and you've loaded that equipment into the rooms. You've established the door information, and you've loaded those doors into the rooms. So now you've got a snapshot of the entire project in a CodeBook database, and you haven't even linked to Revit or AutoCAD yet. Once you link, then within the CodeBook database, there are over 70 reports that allow you to validate data. So here's a report, for example, that allows you to compare the square footages of the required program versus what's physically in Revit. This is an actual snapshot of a project where you've got the Healthcare Management Division department, you've got sub-departments coming out of that particular department, and within those sub-departments there's a list of rooms, room names, room codes, line numbers. These are just parameters that you can apply from the Excel file into CodeBook and then export out to a report. And then you have the required square footage per room from the CodeBook database. Likewise, you have the actual square footage coming from Revit, and then it displays the discrepancies. Are you above the square footage, below the square footage? If the value in Revit is 0, it represents that that room exists in the program, but it doesn't yet exist in Revit. It hasn't been placed in Revit. These are the kind of 70 plus reports that output from the CodeBook database, allowing you to compare and validate the program to the Revit or AutoCAD files. You can also predefine the list of required equipment. So here's a snapshot of a room where you can define all the required equipment for a room. The designed list displays the actual Revit families or the AutoCAD blocks or MicroStation cells that CodeBook is finding in the room. And then of course the comparison tab describes what's missing and what's extra. I can't do this in Revit or AutoCAD. I can't predefine a list of equipment in AutoCAD or Revit. Here, this workflow allows me to do that. Again, it turbocharges BIM and CAD. And likewise, you can create, out of CodeBook, a report that describes the discrepancies. So here's a report directly out of CodeBook that describes the pediatric department. And here's a room, the waiting room here. And these are all the pieces of equipment that describe what's required in that room. The values you see in black represent a perfect match. The required equipment that's part of the program and the equipment that's been placed into AutoCAD or Revit match perfectly. The values you see in blue represent equipment that's placed in the required list but does not yet exist in the Revit model or the AutoCAD file. So it displays blue. It's required, but it hasn't been placed in the model. Here you can see these chairs. There are 35 required. There are only 32 in Revit, and therefore 3 are missing. The values you see in red represent equipment that doesn't exist or that is not required inside the program, but it does exist inside of Revit, and therefore it's displaying in red. Again, this is another one of 70 reports that CodeBook uses to validate the data and validate either the room data, the equipment, or the door requirements. The last item is exposing BIM and CAD to FM and GIS, and for the O&M data, for commissioning, and for punch listing. So within the CodeBook project, because CodeBook was designed specifically for locating the room and therefore locating all the assets in the room, we've been able to expose the campus, the building, the quadrant, the level, the room, and the asset to other products outside of CodeBook, such as Maximo. So here we can actually bring assets right from CodeBook into Maximo, and from Maximo you can then manage and maintain those assets. With ArcGIS, we can expose the values into an ArcGIS program as a geodatabase, and from there you can do all kinds of repair, replace, remove, edits, however you want to manage the data. And likewise, CodeBook Mobile. This allows you access to the live CodeBook project from a handheld device. Here's an example of what we're doing for a client currently. The client has an iPad device. They walk up to the room and they scan the QR code of that room. Within the CodeBook device, it then brings up the actual CodeBook project on their server with that particular room, and from there they can then do all kinds of punch listing. If they want to take a photograph, they can take a photograph of that particular room and add a note. There's a leaky tile, there's a damaged floor, there's a missing piece of equipment, whatever that value is, they can actually take a picture, they can make a note. Likewise, they can address parameters within the database for floors, walls, and ceilings for commissioning purposes, and whatever values you want to display there. They can also get a list of all the equipment, and they can actually click a piece of equipment, and from that piece of equipment go into the instance values of that piece of equipment for commissioning purposes and make whatever edits they wish. They can define who it belongs to, the commissioning date, the drawing number, the operational status of that piece of equipment, whatever values they want as instance values, and those values are being changed back to the actual instance of that piece of equipment within the CodeBook database. So the user that's using this device doesn't have to know Revit or AutoCAD or Maximo or ArcGIS. They simply have a device that they can get a list that they are comfortable with and make whatever edits they need to make within the database. And again, it's going back to the live database. It's not a copy of the database. They're actually editing the database live from a handheld device. Thank you very much for your time. My name is Cyril Verley, and we look forward to hearing from you. Take care. Bye-bye.